Good evening, folks. This is my day at the candy store. Uh, every year we get into a whole, what are the Pats going to do in the draft kind of a thing. Now, as you probably know, the draft is April 25th, 26th, 27th. And at great expense, I've got my oldest grandson online, Christopher, and Chris is right now in South Carolina and visiting with relatives, and he has agreed to join us. Hey, Chris, how you doing?
Doing great. Thanks
Good.
for having me.
Good. Glad to have
Down
you.
in South Carolina, enjoying the weather. It's going to be 90 degrees the next few days.
You're killing me. You're killing me. We're okay here. It's, in the 60s, which is what the most we can expect at this point in our lives, I guess. But again, the reason we're encouraging you to join us tonight, the word is that you're pretty good when it comes to the draft, what to look for, and so on and so forth. We could look at what's happening globally, but that's insane. What we need to do is pretty much focus on the Patriots. What do you see happening with them? And I guess we can start from your perspective. What are the key needs that the team has currently?
Off the top of my head, first three: quarterback, wide receiver, offensive tackle. The team did a pretty good job this offseason prioritizing bringing back Mike Onwenu. I think that was the most important signing of the offseason. It seems like he's kind of a permanent fixture over at tackle now, at right tackle. So, yeah, I think those are the three biggest needs. Defense, there are, they could use some defensive linemen, but they like to replace. I don't think Lawrence Guy is there anymore.
Correct, he's gone.
So I think they could use a big edge setter. But, Judon should be coming back. They got Uche back on a really cheap deal. You got the cornerstone of your secondary in Christian Gonzalez. Jawan Bentley will be back. Jelani Tavai played great last season. So, and Duggar was re-signed. So you kind of got pieces everywhere on defense. I expect to see a Christian Barmore extension at some point soon. So defense, as much as they could use a little bit of help, I think the priority has got to be offense. This was one of the worst offenses in the last 10 years, what we had to watch this past year.
Yep.
In years past, the offense hasn't been great, but they were able to establish a running game. But Ramondre had a down year. I don't think Zeke lived up to expectations, but it was because the offensive line was so brutal. So in my personal opinion, it all starts up front, figuring out the left tackle situation.
I don't disagree with anything you've said. The only thing I would add to it, they need a playmaker, a tight end that they really don't have at this point. They've got a couple of okay guys, which is better than what they were 2 months ago. They had nobody signed to play tight end. And one of the reasons that they lost as many games as they did, other than the reasons you brought up, all of which are valid, obviously, is the kicker. There are many reasons, speaking of kicking, that the previous administration deserved to be kicked to the curb. Two things that just jumped at me. They brought in a kicker last year in the 4th round. He wasn't rated the best kicker. There other kickers came along who way outperformed this guy. But it wasn't just a 4th round pick, Kevin, whatever his name is. They traded up with another 4th round pick to get this guy. And he was devastating. He was so bad. He lost a number of games for them by himself. The other problem is obviously the offensive line. We've talked about this in the past, that this is something that basically Belichick felt he always could get, guys off the street, plug them in, no problem. When he had Scarnecchia as his offensive line coach, he was somehow able to make something out of these guys. Silk purse out of his sow's ear, as the old expression goes. And I heard he was actually queried, this is Belichick, before the season really went down the tubes and it was apparent that the offensive line was a major problem. He was asked by Chris Gaspar, who's a pretty good reporter, why don't you put assets into the offensive line? And of course, Belichick, being as stoic and as nasty as he always is, said, what are you talking about? You don't know what you're saying. We have spent a tremendous amount of assets on the offensive line. Oh, really? What did he do? The previous season, they drafted not one, not two, but three offensive linemen in like the 5th, 6th, and 7th rounds, as I remember. Last season, they drafted three more guys, 4th, 5th, 5th. That's 6 draft choices. Every one of them is basically a stiff, okay? And then on top of it, he also goes out and spends 6th-round draft choices to bring in guys like Verdelian Lowe, whatever his name is, and 2 or 3 others. He basically brought in about 10 guys. Not one of them is a legitimate pro.
I think one of them might have stuck. City So.
He's the only one. And Mafi, the other left guard, not too bad. But they've got a major problem with Strange, who was a number 1 pick. Everybody said he's a 3rd or a 4th round pick at best. He's been terribly underperforming. And last year they ended up with a guy at left tackle at about 400 pounds who didn't want to be there. And when he plays, he's great. Trent Brown, finally, he's the hell out of here. So that being said, all of those things contributed to the horrible performance by Mac Jones, which means now you've got the 3rd pick in the draft, and everybody's all excited about that. Well, that's fine, but this is not like the NBA where one guy, because you got 5 guys on the court and that's it. With NFL, you've got 11 guys on offense, 11 guys on defense, plus special teams. You're not going to get just one guy that's going to turn your team around. So right now, you're living obviously in Virginia and you're visiting folks down in Carolina. They're going nuts up here with different quarterbacks that they should be bringing in. The flavor of the day seems to be J.J. McCarthy, of all people. Oh, they love him because he was at Michigan. You know, these guys have a shot. And there's 3 or 4 others that are pretty good quarterbacks. My position on it is you got the 3rd pick in the draft. You've got an absolute feeding frenzy for quarterbacks right now, which means if they play their cards right, they should be able to trade back, still get a good quarterback, but also begin plugging some of these gaping holes that they have. They've got 1 or 2 gaping holes in the offensive line at tackle, which for starters. They really don't have a playmaker as a tight end, which they need. They really could use a halfback who can be a playmaker, which they don't have. And oh yeah, they do have holes galore at the receiver position. So there's not one messiah that you're going to bring in that's going to fix all these things. So that being said, where are the priorities? Again, if they blow their brains out and go with any one of the quarterbacks in the 3rd pick, who's going to block for him and who's he going to throw to? Or are they going to become piñatas like normally happens? Sam Darnold, as you remember a few years ago, he was the 3rd pick in the draft. And
Mac Jones
was 15th, but Darnold was number 3. The same story. He went in, got his brains beat out, and he's never been any more than a backup quarterback. And this is what happens. When they start looking for the pass rush rather than the pass receiver, you got trouble. And unfortunately, that's exactly what they've had. The kid that the Jets picked in the second pick in the 1st round, Wilson from Brigham Young, whatever, same story. He's a joke now. Trey Lance, 3rd pick in the draft, boom. All quarterbacks, 2nd and 3rd picks. Terrible, terrible results because they went to terrible teams with very, very sketchy lines and no real solid playmakers to support them. And this is what you can expect. So I don't care if they hold on to that 3rd pick right off the bat. I'm going to be sick to my stomach because they shouldn't do it. They have to have the guts to trade back, especially when people are willing to give 3 and 4 number 1s for a quarterback nowadays. I take the deal. And, if they can't use that to build the team, it's not going to turn around, in 1 year. You're probably looking at 2 or 3 year rebuild with this. And I think if they look at it that way, intelligently, rather than going for the fake, that at least that's how I see it.
So I agree with you big time on the trade back, but just to offer the flip side, like the responses I get, what I hear from people who are saying they should make the pick is if we are looking at it in a 2 to 3 year window, you've got 2 to 3 years to plug all the rest of the holes. How many times are you going to have a pick this high? They're clearly in a sweet spot where there's 3 main quarterbacks at the top of the draft, 4 if you want to include McCarthy.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, we haven't had a pick this high since the 90s, and this obviously is not going to be the same regime. There's a good chance we have picks around this level for the next few years. But to get an actual top 3 pick in a quarterback class where there are 3 top quarterbacks, I think that's where people kind of push back and say, well, you might not have a chance to do this. And if you do want to get the young quarterback, you're going to have to do what these teams are doing, trading 4 first-round picks to move up. So I understand that. I really do. But I feel like the only way they make this pick at 3 is if they are absolutely in love with one of the kids. And I don't necessarily think they are, because I think they all have pretty major flaws. Even the number 1 pick, Caleb Williams, I think he's got some major issues. But, if they do make the pick, if they do select quarterback 3, I would prefer it to be Drake May. Out of the 3, I feel like he's similar to Josh Allen a little bit in the sense that he's prototype size, big dude, mobile, can get outside the pocket, but had accuracy issues in college. Unlike the second pick, Jaden Daniels, who I'm assuming is going to be the second pick to Washington. Jaden Daniels kind of, is a sideline thrower, deep ball guy, and he rushes to pick up yards on early downs. He's not really someone who ever threw over the middle of the field. He's not going to be able to attack behind the linebackers and in front of the safeties, which, that deep in is a big route in the NFL these days. So I have concerns about Jaden Daniels with his ability to adapt to the pro game. I think Drake May could. His bread and butter is over the middle of the field. He can really make any throw on the field. He's got great arm talent in the sense that he can throw off his back foot. He's got a cannon. He can drive balls in there. The main issues for me is that he, on his tape, just has a lot of head-scratching plays where receiver's wide open, goes through his reads, checks down, guy's wide open in the flat, throws it to his feet. There's a lot of that on his tape.
Well,
inexplicable errors.
There's a lot of people, again, up here that I keep hearing that they concur with what you're saying, because their premise is you're going to bring him, whoever you bring in, they're not going to play next year. They're going to be working on the sideline, figuring it out, number 1, which is going to be helpful to any one of them. But the second part of it is maybe, just maybe, they can stabilize the offensive line and the skill positions so that when they're ready to play in 25 and in 26, at least you've got a nucleus. In other words, if you bring somebody in, and I remember a long time ago when the Patriots moved to Foxborough, which is another story, they had the first pick in that draft. It was 1971, okay? They drafted a guy out of Stanford named Jim Plunkett. Jim Plunkett was a piñata for years. The guy stood in the pocket as a big, strong kid, got hammered. And then finally they ended up trading him out to San Francisco, and for like 3 ones, a quarterback, and I think a 2. At that point, it was an unprecedented haul. Bottom line is it didn't work out there either because it was a lousy team. He stayed in the Bay Area, went to Oakland, and now suddenly he was with Oakland, the Raiders, the old Raiders, and they were great at that point. He was the catalyst, got them to the World Championship, Super Bowl. That was Jim Plunkett. And that particular year that he came out in 71, I'll do this quickly. Plunkett went number one. Number two was Manning's father, Archie Manning, who went to New Orleans. And then the third guy was a guy named Dan Pastorini, who went to Houston. The common thread is each one of those teams was horrible. And the common thread is not one of them actually did anything as pros for the teams that drafted them, 1, 2, or 3. And the same kind of thing as we have now. So I think a lot of people have taken note of that, and they realize that to make this thing work, it's got to be a team that's surrounding you. What the Patriots offer, they've got a good, solid defense. You don't have to worry about throwing it every down because the defense can't hold them. And I think they're going to still make some moves, even in the draft, that may surprise you, to bring in maybe an extra high-flying cornerback and perhaps a pass rusher, and maybe a big guy as well, because they need that to just keep that defense as solid as it is. But how do you fix everything in one draft? You can't do it. You just can't do it.
Yeah. And I think that's why a lot of people want them to go with the quarterback and figure it out.
Which I understand that.
I agree with you, though. And, I looked at Mac Jones. I know this isn't necessarily the case for Drake May, but it is for Jaden Daniels. He played in college with 2 first-round picks in this year's draft, Jaden Daniels at LSU. Brian Thomas, the wide receiver, and Malik Neighbors, who will be a surefire top 10 pick. In my opinion, best wide receiver in the draft.
Yep.
But Mac Jones is coming from Alabama, where he's got 5-star recruits all across the offensive line. He came in second for Heisman to who? His wide receiver. His wide receiver beat him out for Heisman. Mm-hmm. So then he had Jalen Waddle, who's not too shabby, another top 10 pick there. Yep. So you would think drafting a guy like that who just had everything, you would think to support him, right? Because we don't even know what Mac Jones would look like when he doesn't have an elite supporting cast.
Yeah.
Well, that would be the case with Jaden Daniels in this year's draft. I think if you were to take him and bring him into just some team where he's getting killed every week, I think the same thing could happen to Drake May too. Just you can ruin these guys' confidence at the beginning of their career. You take enough hits, as you've stated many times, you stop looking downfield. Your eyes start looking at the pass rush before you're looking at your receivers and analyzing the defense. You couple that with the media scrutiny in this town. I bet you Mac Jones was genuinely depressed. He'd probably never heard so many people talk about him in his life. Like, it is crazy in New England. The sports talk radio is obnoxious. And so, they had a bunch of money in free agency. If you want, you could still go out and get Brandon Ayuk or T. Higgins, but you got to give up draft picks now on top of huge contracts to get these guys. So at this point,
it's like that game we used to play, whack-a-mole. You pop one, another one pops up. And that's where they're at this point. By the way, speaking about other guys who were super heralded, when Darnold was the 3rd pick in the draft, there was another golden child named Josh Rosen that a lot of people out of USC. This is.
It was UCLA.
UCLA. I'm sorry. This is the next great thing. Okay. Yeah. And this guy was known because when he was striding to the microphone to accept the fact that he was the 9th pick in the draft, and he had an Arizona hat on. He was really upset, and he said that afterwards. He was really off the wall that he was picked 9th. He deserved to go 1 or 2. Bottom line, he's gone through 6 different teams. He's a legitimate 4th-string quarterback. So you never know what you have with these guys.
The next season.
That's exactly right. We have about 7 minutes to go.
Okay.
I'm going to give you my scenario, and I want you to comment and give me your scenario. And by the way, folks, this is my grandson, Christopher. And he's on not just because of familial connections here. He knows about as much about the draft. And so, he makes money with this. He knows what he's talking about and has for years. He's excellent at it. So I really listen to what he has to say. But at any rate, what I would like to see happen, I would like to see them make a deal. They've got the third pick in the draft. I'd like to see them trade with the Raiders, give them the rights to J.J. McCarthy, because the coach out there is Harbaugh, who coached McCarthy at Michigan and loves him. He can start, a whole new regime out there with this guy.
He's at the Chargers.
The
not
Chargers.
Raiders.
I always
Yeah,
get those
yeah,
confused now since they've moved.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's at the Chargers, and the Chargers give us back their quarterback, who's a good one, in Justin Herbert. That fulfills one big hole, and we get the fifth pick in the draft with that. Okay, so now you've already solidified your quarterback situation, and you're going to have to pay big money for it. But then you've got the fifth pick, which you could use that for one of the great wide receivers or one of the great offensive tackles that's out there, or better yet, because again, there's such a bloodlust to get those picks, you know that Minnesota is desperate for a quarterback because Kirk Cousins is gone. They would offer the 11th and 23rd pick in the first round and their great wide receiver, Justin Jefferson, who's on the last year of his contract, with the proviso that we bring him in, we sign him up for, beaucoup bucks. Now, without even making a draft pick, you've got a quarterback and you've got a wide receiver that are going to be in place for a long time. And then when you come to 11 and 23, they can use those picks, at least one of them, for a great, in my opinion, a great offensive lineman. And maybe you do the same thing at 23. Or maybe at 11, you take a shot and you get Brock Bowers, who's a fantastic tight end. So now that's three holes that you've plugged, and you use the 23rd pick for an offensive lineman. When you roll into the second round, and then I'll stop with this because I want to hear you, who I want to see them get is Ricky Pearsall, who's a tremendous, tremendous wide receiver out of Florida, that if you put him and Jefferson out there at the same time and then Pop Douglas to back him up, suddenly you have an offense. And whatever they do with the balance of it, they've got a couple of threes and fours, that's fine. There's plenty of decent players in this draft. As I've heard it, this year's draft, everybody is being drafted about a round later than they normally would be drafted. In other words, this year's second round picks, in most cases, would be first round picks.
Yep.
Anyway, I'm going to shut up. Ball's in your court. What would you do? What would you like to see happen?
So I'm a fan of trading back as well. I think there's three teams in particular in the early teens who we could trade back with. Minnesota, not quite early teens at pick 11, but then I believe in some order it's Denver and Vegas, right behind them. Then Vegas, always looking to make splashes, and I think they brought in Jimmy Garoppolo last year. That clearly didn't work out. I don't think Aiden O'Connell is the answer over there. But then Minnesota losing Kirk Cousins. I think all three teams have a dire need for a quarterback and would be willing to move up. But for the sake of playing it out, I think Minnesota has the best pieces, considering that they have 2 first-round picks this year. I think Jefferson would be amazing, but I don't know if he'd sign an extension here, so I think that might make him untradeable for us. But if you picked up 2 ones this year from Minnesota, 1 next year, you move back, pick 11, I'm totally comfortable with them moving back up. Whether that means you're taking Joe Alt, the left tackle out of Notre Dame, which would be phenomenal, or my guy, Malik Neighbors, who, I think it's very important to get a dominant number 1 wide receiver in the room.
He's going to go to the Giants at 6.
At some point.
Neighbors will go to the Giants at 6.
Yeah.
Or Odunze. One of them will be there.
Yeah. I love Odunze too. So
great.
I think Neighbors is the guy, but, there's options to move back up, but if you sit there, I think probably the right move is tackle. There's a kid Fashanu out of Penn State.
Yep.
But then you'd have pick 23, and I think there's plenty of options at 23 against all the positions we need. And then I would like them to take a shot on a young quarterback regardless, whether that's Michael Penix if he were to be there at 23. A lot of red flags with him, but if you're not a top 5 pick, you probably got red flags. But my guy is Spencer Rattler.
Mentioning Penix, he was in town this week, and all of a sudden, the people that were saying, "Oh, Penix, he's got no chance, no chance. He's just not that good." Suddenly, they're in love with this guy. They've looked at his tapes, and they knew that he ran what, a 4.3 or a 4.4 recently with 2 questionable knees. He's got good size. He's got a fantastic arm. He's a smart guy. He's a professional guy. He's 24 years old. He's been around. He's not a 20 or a 21-year-old like some of the others are. And they're all excited. But I know that you have a particular binky among the quarterbacks that you'd like to see the Pats go with. And not in the first round. Who is he?
Spencer Rattler, quarterback out of South Carolina. He was the #1 college recruit in his class coming out of high school, committed to Oklahoma, where he played for a year or maybe 2. But our friend Caleb Williams, who's going #1, was his backup to start at Oklahoma. Spencer led them to an undefeated record for the first 5 games, but was still benched for Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams ended up leaving to follow Lincoln Riley to USC, but Spencer Rattler basically transferred to South Carolina, where he's dealt with a lot of adversity. He had a great wide receiver, Xavier Legette, who should be a high pick in this year's draft. He got hurt. Whole entire offensive line, all 5 guys got hurt, and he had the toughest schedule in college football. So it's a guy who's been through adversity, and I feel like if we're going to take a rookie quarterback and play him, he's going to have to deal with some adversity.
So he's your guy. My guy is the wide receiver from Florida State, whichever. I always get those confused. Ricky Pearsall. So we'll see what happens.
Big fan of Pearsall, so.
Oh, I know. We're looking forward to having you here in the flesh to participating in this. And I thank you for everything you had to do to make this happen today. Thanks so much.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Oh, as usual. And maybe we'll have you back on to discuss the NBA and how the Celtics are doing. We can do that in another month or so, okay? Thank you for joining us. Okay.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Okay. Okay, folks, as I say, that's my version of going to the candy store. Love it, and it's a lot of excitement around here for it. Patriots are the team we love to hate and love to love. That's the way it is, so we shall see. But at any rate, we'll be back to normal business next time you watch Activate Worcester. And I thank you very, very much for watching. And keep your ear to the ground out there, folks. There's a lot going on in our world. And not all of it is negative. A lot of it is still positive, too. So, again, I thank you so much for watching. Enjoy yourself. Thank you so much.